What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Strackbine, joined always by my man in the corner, producer Nick Belsky. Find us on youtube.com/ All Steelers Talker. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they're in the headlines once again. This time it is a giant question mark to potentially their biggest offensive name and a superstar that many believe was on the rise, but maybe there are some question marks that need to be answered before anybody or anything is solidified in the city of Pittsburgh. Meanwhile, one AFC East writer for the team is already making playoff guarantees against the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're going to respond to some pretty hot takes early this morning. And then Cam Sutton is a roster bubble candidate that I just don't think I agree with. We'll talk about that. And one Sports Illustrated insider believes that the Steelers are out on the wide receiver. His reasoning doesn't really make much sense. We'll dive into that as well. And as always, we will answer all of your questions. So please make sure you're tossing them in the chat. It's a lovely day here in the city of Pittsburgh. I think every morning that's going by, it's getting a little bit more crazy, a little bit more nonsense, but we're getting closer to football. So it's a good and bad. How you feeling, my friend?
I'm feeling good. A lot of trash talk over the headlines and the airwaves over the last couple of days. You always like, seeing that a little bit of rowdiness coming from the NFL, especially with everybody getting antsy, waiting for training camp. So I'm excited to crack into what those Miami Dolphins writers were talking about.
I'm very excited for that one. That one was one that it popped up yesterday late in the afternoon. I was walking around. My brothers came here. We're actually going to see the Red Hot Chili Peppers tonight, which I've been told is a phenomenal show. I won't lie to you. We were going to see Kid Cudi. He was the opening act. He broke his foot. Now we're going to see Red Hot Chili Peppers. I'm not complaining, but I was waiting for them. In the midst of waiting for them, I'm doing my scroll on social media, and I run across some Miami Dolphins guy just talking smack. And I was like, what? We're talking playoffs? Playoffs in July? I mean, look, you need some things to talk about. We're going to dive into that in a moment. I want to start with George Pickens. That is obviously the biggest headline that has made the Pittsburgh Steelers airways in the last 48 hours or so. One NFL insider, and let me start by saying this. This is Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's Ray Fittipaldo, who I respect tremendously and believe that he has so much insight on this team. It's crazy. And a lot of my insight comes from watching and learning from a guy like Ray Fittipaldo. But when it comes to George Pickens, he was asked in his weekly chat why the team, or could the team, afford another wide receiver one like Brandon Ayuk if they're going to pay George Pickens in the future. And he said, quote, "I'd argue the Steelers don't know if they should sign Pickens to a second contract. Based on his 2023 season, I think that's a smart approach on their part. There is more to being a number one wide receiver than making a couple of acrobatic catches and the occasional long touchdown catch. But I do agree with you on the trade part of this. I wouldn't give up a lot of draft capital, and I wouldn't be influenced by the rocketing wide receiver market. That's the big downside from not making a move at the draft. Jefferson signed his big deal after the draft, so the contract for any wide receiver, any of the top wide receivers you might acquire in a trade, went up too." I mean, look at George Pickens. I still think has a lot of development left. I don't think I disagree with you have to do more than a couple of crazy acrobatic catches and some long touchdown runs. I agree with both of those things. My argument is very simple, very straightforward. Last year, we came on this show so many times and talked about all the craziness that George Pickens was bringing to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And, he made it very known to me that he was a fan of the show, but he heard what was coming about him and the drama and everything that was circulating around him not giving effort. Then he went on the field against Cincinnati Bengals, had 195 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns, and after the game told me that I was on the list of receipts. So plain and simple, that was enough for me to say, yeah, it's probably wide receiver one material right there. That guy's going to be pretty good in the NFL. I don't think I have any reservations about George Pickens making this work. I think if we're going to have an argument yesterday or a topic of conversation yesterday discussing how the Pittsburgh Steelers somewhat let Kenny Pickett down, you have to say that they have so far to this point done everything in their power to seemingly hurt George Pickens' progress. And he has done everything in his power to make sure that he remains a superstar on the rise. So I get it. Maybe you hold off and you wait, but I don't think I sit here saying the Pittsburgh Steelers make a wide receiver trade because they know George Pickens is not going to get a second contract. I think this year you look at it more like, if this guy goes off, how much trouble are you in financially if you do make that trade, because you're not going to let George Pickens go. Wide receiver one, not wide receiver one. You thinking you have some holdback on whether or not George Pickens gets a second deal here?
I do to a certain extent. I agree with you. We saw it last year, right? At the end of the year, Matt Canada's gone. Mason Rudolph comes in. He shows it in a little bit of a sample size there against Cincinnati, against Seattle, and none of the receivers did anything against Baltimore. I'm not holding that against him because it was a monsoon. But at the same time, you know, Fittipaldo has a good point there where it is you need to be able to show it consistently. Now he's set up to do that this year. And that's the good thing is Steelers don't need to make that decision now. They have the ability to wait this year. And I believe he has another year on his contract as well, in his rookie deal. So they have time to figure this out. And he's in a much better situation now with Arthur Smith. Not to mention, we've talked all summer. It is George Pickens and his band of merry men. That's the opportunity. Can you elevate and rise to it in a full season? That's what I want to see. Obviously, he has the capability to go off for a game here and there, and he has immense talent. But at the same time, can you do it consistently over a year? That's what makes a wide receiver one to me, and that's what I'm looking for this year in George Pickens.
I agree. I 100% agree. And I think I'm looking for the same things. But I think my expectation is that that's going to happen. I don't look at it and say this isn't going to happen. This is going to be an issue. Last year, George Pickens told me, we were talking, and I was talking to Frisman Jackson too. Like that's where this conversation started is, Frisman, what is the goal for George Pickens in year 2? Because in year 1, he proved he could catch any football within a 100-foot radius. As long as you throw it up, George Pickens has a shot to come down with it. What's the goal in year 2? The goal in year 2 was to be able to catch it and take it 60 yards to the house. All right, that happened. Cool. He was able to do that. Year 3, I don't know what those goals are yet. I don't know what those expectations are yet. I haven't had an opportunity to talk to Zach Azzani and break that down because there's so much other conversations to be had. I look at it and say, if year 3, the goal is to just always be a reliable set of hands, I'm excited to see if he could be a always reliable set of hands. But I don't look at this and say George Pickens has any, there's no part of me right now that believes George Pickens' on-field actions will be a reason that the Pittsburgh Steelers do not extend him. I think George Pickens' distractions, if they continue, could be a reason not to resign him. But I also think that in year 3, he's going to take a pretty significant step forward as a mature player and as a leader in this locker room, especially with better coaches, a better offensive system, some better quarterbacks, and some better leadership. So I'm not totally. I don't know. There's little parts of me that believe that George Pickens isn't around in Pittsburgh for the next 6 years, 5 years, something like that, unless he gets traded, which, this is the wide receiver market. This could happen all the time. Is George Pickens a reason I'm not making a trade for a wide receiver? Absolutely not. He is 100% a reason that I'm thinking Brandon Ayuk might be too expensive, but if Brandon Ayuk's on the table and you could get both of them, I'm getting both of them. And I'm not even worrying about it. You'll figure it out long term.
And I think I was about to say, it goes to the fact that there have been reports that they were interested in Brandon Ayuk. That tells me that the Steelers do think that, hey, we might need to have George Pickens be a number 2 going into next season if we want to win a Super Bowl this year. Because at the end of the day, again, you take it with a grain of salt. There's an asterisk because Kenny Pickett is what he was. Matt Canada is what he was. There was a game where George Pickens was going into it with the spotlight on him against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And again, weather was a factor there as well. But outside of one catch, one route, one play, he was held in check. He can't do that this season. He needs to be able to break through when all the lights and all the attention's on him. And that's going to be a big question mark for him. And that's going to be a big test for him in 2024.
I agree. I don't disagree with that one. And that's a good point. That's a good argument to make. That's very true. You can't have those this year. It's all going to come down to a lot of things. I will say this. I don't think George Pickens is a $30 million a year wide receiver next offseason. I think he's a 20 million a year wide receiver, maybe a 22 million a year wide receiver, but that's not even expensive in the wide receiver market when you're looking long term over the next 4 or 5 years. It'll just keep climbing. So I think that he's there. I agree with you. You can't have games like you did against Jacksonville. That can't happen. I still look at him. I could still picture him so vividly looking me in the eyes saying, I kept receipts. And then after the game, letting it be known that I was on the receipts. It's like, all right, I get
I
it.
like it.
I would be on the receipts too. If it was reversed, you would be on my receipt. I get it. I 100% understand. But that's where we are. We'll see. There's a lot of conversation. That one was interesting for me. That was a very interesting topic when it came to my Twitter scrolls. Next to the next thing that we have to talk about, which is some Miami Dolphins writer who just decided, dude, you want to know what I want to do today? I just want to go off. I want to talk playoffs. I want to call people out. And you want to know who I want to call out? I want to call out the Pittsburgh Steelers. I got to find his name, Travis Wingfield, who is a writer for the Miami Dolphins and also a host of their podcast. He was on their podcast talking about playoff situations and where the Dolphins stand and what happened with the Kansas City Chiefs, and then talking about the other side of things, which is the Detroit Lions. And he compared, hey, the Detroit Lions, like, yeah, you got to win your division. You got to win some playoff games. Every game of the playoffs tough, but at the same time, they kind of had an easy route, comparing their route to the Dolphins route and saying, well, the Lions, they had the Bucks, man. There was nothing. The Dolphins, they had the Kansas City Chiefs. Then the Steelers just decided they were catching strays in this bad boy. This is what Wingfield had to say. Quote, sometimes winning playoff games is as favorable as your draw. Granted, good for the Lions. They won their division, and the Rams team was not an easy out, even though I picked against them all year. This was a good Rams football team that they beat, but they get the Bucks in the divisional round. Can we have that? Can we get the Steelers at home in the divisional round this year? That would be a guaranteed trip to the conference championship game this year. The Pittsburgh Steelers randomly catching strays on a Monday afternoon. Wild. Let me start by saying this. I'm not going to sit here and try to say that the Pittsburgh Steelers deserve any praise in the playoffs, because if you don't win a playoff game in 7 years, you don't have any reputation to win a playoff game. Okay. At the same time, let me just drop a really quick stat here. Just a very simple stat. The Miami Dolphins, okay, last playoff win. Take a guess at when that was.
Oh, does it start with a 19?
No.
Okay.
No, it's very close. Say,
it's very it feels
close.
Like it has to be close to that.
It's very close. 2000 was the last time the Miami Dolphins won a playoff game. The year 2000. We've had like 7, the world is going to end since the last time the Miami Dolphins have won a playoff game. The last time the Pittsburgh Steelers won a playoff game was in 2016 against the Miami Dolphins. So at some point, you just don't throw stones in a glass house. And that is where Travis Wingfield may have messed up. Now, are the Pittsburgh Steelers going to use a random dude who writes for the team as bulletin board material in July? No chance. But if they run into this team in January in Miami, you best believe this is going to resurface and that things are going to just happen. And it's very simple. You just don't throw strays in July, especially if you work for the team and you're trying not to aggravate other teams, especially about the playoffs. I'm a karma guy. You just don't jinx things, especially 6 months early. Wild times. I sent it to you this morning. Your thoughts?
I was laughing my butt off reading that. I was like, really? In July, we're going to do this, especially a team like the Miami Dolphins. We're not even talking about, if it's the Baltimore Ravens, there's a history between the two organizations. The Ravens were in the AFC Championship last year, but the Miami Dolphins have folded in the playoffs the last 2 years, especially just down the stretch in general, not just the playoffs. If you get to the, week 10 and beyond of the Miami Dolphins, they just have not been the same team as they were in August and September. And there's a, obvious reason for that. 1 year it was Tua was injured. The next year it was, this is a team that thrives on good weather and fast tracks. And you just don't get that, especially in the playoffs. And even if you're down in Miami, the matchup between the Steelers and the Dolphins, the last time they faced off, I mean, obviously the Dolphins won, but they had to stave off a fourth quarter game-winning drive from rookie Kenny Pickett in his third or fourth start with Matt Canada at the helm. I think this team is going to be a little bit better. And that Miami team, well, they've made some improvements. I don't think that it's been quite as large as the Steelers, and especially when you get to that time of the year, I think coaching matters, and I think McDaniel has shrunk a little bit. when that ends up being the case, and Mike Tomlin, again, you need to go out there and prove it. But in the history, Mike Tomlin has had some success, but it's just been a while.
Yes. That's look at the end of the day, you have to, it would be, there's two sides of this conversations. Okay. Or of this conversation. The first one is you have to beat teams like the Kansas City Chiefs to get to the Super Bowl anyways. So why are you trying to have the easy route? Nobody wants the easy route. Nobody wants the easy route to the Super Bowl. I mean, if you could get it, cool. You're not going to get it in the AFC. It's impossible to get an easy route to the playoffs or to the Super Bowl in the AFC. You got to go through the Baltimore Ravens, the Houston Texans, the Kansas City Chiefs, probably the Pittsburgh Steelers, potentially the Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, if the Buffalo Bills are still good, the Buffalo Bills, there's just the New York Jets could be in there. There's so many teams that you're like, yep, that's not easy. No matter what, you got challenging games. And then to guarantee something that your team has, like, this you don't do it. You don't do it. Not this, and you have no idea what the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to look like. Like you could sit here and say, oh, that's a guaranteed win. Maybe last year. I don't know about this year. The defense got better. The quarterback situation's better. The running back situation is going to be better. The offensive line is better. The offensive coordinator is better. The general manager is here for 2 years now. So now you got actual traction with things that are happening. There's so much going on for a team to be, this is not a guaranteed, and to be totally honest, of all the teams that made the playoffs last year, I honestly think the easiest guarantee outside of potentially like the Jacksonville Jaguars at the time, because they showed up in the playoffs, but heading into the playoffs was probably the Miami Dolphins. Like, as crazy as that sounds, was potentially the Miami Dolphins. The Cleveland Browns might have been in there, but Joe Flacco was red hot. So, there were things going on. I don't know. Wild times, but bulletin board material, man, in July. That is what it is. And if you're going to send the Steelers to, Steelers got to go to Miami, the divisional playoff round. I'm not complaining. It's January. It's cold here. I will go to Miami for a weekend. Zero questions asked. Questions asked. All right. I got two more things I want to talk about real quick. Then we'll answer everybody's questions. The first one is, over the last couple of days, I've been watching a lot and looking at a lot of roster bubble candidates and everything that is going on in the roster bubble and who's going to make the team, who's not going to make the team. There's one name that stands out pretty consistently that I've seen on 2 or 3 lists so far that I just kind of want to take just 2 minutes. Nothing crazy, but I just want to talk about it. That's Cam Sutton. And my thoughts are very simple. You could think Cam Sutton fell off last year with the Detroit Lions. You could think that Cam Sutton's getting suspended this year, which is probably going to happen. And you could have all your issues with Cam Sutton. They're probably justified. I don't think Cam Sutton has any shot of not making this roster, because I think Cam Sutton makes it so much better than it was the day before he signed. That where the Pittsburgh Steelers secondary is very legitimate with Cam Sutton at the helm, running the slot corner, and there's no high expectations, and truthfully, there's nobody to replace him. So I just don't know how that's the case. I can name, 8 or 9 roster bubble guys that are real roster bubble guys. Anthony Averett's on that list. Cam Sutton is not on that list. Demonte KZ might even be on that list. Cam Sutton is not on that list. It just doesn't make sense. Am I too favorable in Cam Sutton's direction here? Because I just don't know how that happens.
I understand what you're saying, but I also see a path to where he does become a roster bubble type player. And that is if somebody else steps up in that role and they just say it's not worth it to keep on a guy on the 53 man that's going to get suspended for 6, 8, whatever many games, when this other player has shown up and stepped up and can definitely fill that role. The problem being, you were there. Nobody stepped up in that role over the 12 practices in helmets and shorts.
Yep.
Something might change whenever they get the training camp and the pads come on, but that's the only path that I can see to it. So I understand it to a certain extent, especially with the looming suspension. But if nobody steps up, and there's a majority chance that nobody steps up, then it's likely that Cam Sutton makes the roster anyway.
Yeah, I just don't. Anthony Averett didn't look good. Beanie Bishop looked like an undrafted rookie. There's just nobody to compete with him. And I agree, if somebody does step up and somebody's, oh, this guy's ridiculous, Beanie Bishop's the next superstar, you got to keep him on the field. Yeah, okay, I get it. But even then, like, If Cam's just going to be your backup for league minimum, that's as good of a backup as you could get for the Pittsburgh Steelers to just be your just fourth corner who's just out there playing wherever, could play safety, could fill all the roles, could play dime backer. It just makes too much sense. He's not a bad cornerback. He's a good cornerback, and if you use him the right way, he actually plays pretty well and is very reliable. So you just got to figure that out. I don't know how. I get it with the suspension, but I think they knew what the suspension was coming in here when they signed him. And I expect that they already have that worked in somewhere. They have to find a replacement, but I don't see anybody. I don't see two guys, because that's what it's going to take is two guys. It's going to take the guy that replaces him as the starter and the guy that replaces him as the backup. And I don't think they have two that can make that noise. Unless Anthony Everett is unreal, but I don't see it coming. I don't see it coming. The next thing I want to talk about real quick is Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer, who, you got to always respect Albert Breer, was asked about the Pittsburgh Steelers trade market for a wide receiver and Brandon Ayuk and everything else. And in his response, pretty much said, not going to happen. This is what he said. Quote, the Steelers really don't go outside the organization to fill that position. Don Looney, was the last player to be Pittsburgh's leading receiver in any single season who wasn't homegrown, and that was during World War II. They draft and develop, sometimes to a fault, at that spot. Now, that has been an argument that has been made for months and continues to be made. The Pittsburgh Steelers grow their wide receivers. They do. This is not the Pittsburgh Steelers of 2 years ago. This is not the Pittsburgh Steelers of 10 years ago. This is not your dad's Pittsburgh Steelers, your grandpa's Pittsburgh Steelers, your great-grandpa's Pittsburgh Steelers, World War II Pittsburgh Steelers. This is the 2024 Pittsburgh Steelers, and they are so much different. They have Russell Wilson as their quarterback. They have a new offensive coordinator. They fired a coordinator in the middle of the season last year, which was the first time that has ever happened. They are picking up guys, signing guys, letting guys go, and they are threatening to move on from Cam Hayward, which is probably the only routine part of who the Pittsburgh Steelers are currently. Trading for a wide receiver is very much so on the table, and I'm sorry, but Omar Khan has changed so many things in such a short amount of time that argument has been tossed out the window and is so far gone that it makes almost zero sense. You agree? You disagree?
Yeah, I could have continued where you were going there. It's not your older brother's Pittsburgh Steelers. It's not your, upperclassmen roommates Pittsburgh. This is a brand new Pittsburgh Steelers as far as the front office is concerned, especially because you look at the things that have changed. You mentioned all of those things. Look at how much a guy like Omar Khan has invested on one position, offensive line. And what he's done and how tenacious he has been in getting that. He has used a lot of high premium picks to fix that offensive line. He's taken some swings. Shoot, going into the NFL draft, Steelers didn't have a center on the roster. You can say, Nate Herbig can move over there, but they didn't have somebody that had a center's experience on the roster. And they didn't seem to be interested in bringing anybody on anywhere but the NFL draft. And they were going to go get their guy. And then after that, they'll figure it out if they didn't. So at the end of the day, to say that they're not going to do it because they haven't done it in so long, Omar Khan is looking for any way to improve this team. If that's by trade, then it's by trade. And if it's by trade of a wide receiver, I understand that they've been good at home growing talent, then they're going to do it to make themselves better. And it might not. Here's the thing. Everybody's saying, well, Brandon Ayuk. There's other names out there that could technically become not homegrown talent, but they're young players that the Steelers could mold into wide receivers and put them on that path just a little bit further into their career. A guy like John Mechie and the Texans we talked about a lot. I think that's also an opportunity and a possibility. I just think that ruling it out because of that reason doesn't make sense. Yep.
Traylon Burks is another name. There are options. Mm-hmm. There are so many options that are not Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel or Cortland Sutton, and that's the difference. Is the Pittsburgh Steelers want to get better. They understand they have to get better. They're hunting for a Super Bowl. That's the difference. That's the biggest difference here. Is in the past, the Pittsburgh Steelers were always Super Bowl or bust, but we're going to do it the Pittsburgh Steelers way. Over the last 12 months, I'd say, something has clicked, and whether it's Art Rooney realizing that he just wants to get another one, or Mike Tomlin feeling like he's backed against the wall and his legacy's taken a hit, or the impact of Omar Khan, I don't know. but this is a team that is going to do whatever it takes to go and win a Super Bowl. Like, that's what they're going to do. It's not going to be, oh, this is not we're going to work Kenny Pickett until we absolutely can't work Kenny Pickett anymore. This is we're going to bench Kenny Pickett for Mason Rudolph, who we can't stand. That's who the Pittsburgh Steelers are these days. They're a totally different team. They are a team that we're going to go get Russell Wilson. In years past, dude, all you looked at was the Steelers weren't going to do anything. They're going to go get Patrick Queen and Dante Jackson. They're doing all of these crazy things. Like, this is not this is a new Pittsburgh Steelers regime. This is a new Pittsburgh Steelers way of looking at things. And this is a team that maybe it's not Brandon Ayuk, but it's hard to imagine that they're going into the season with the wide receiver core that they have. And I wish it would happen already so we could stop talking about it, but it's just, we're just waiting to get. Omar Khan's dragging it out. I think he knows what he's doing. Like, I'm excited to see him at Latrobe so I could be like, hey, pal, look, could you just stop? Could you just please do this already? Because you know what you're doing to us, and we would be very thankful if you just got this over with. But this is not we only grow our wide receivers. Not this year. Maybe in years past. Maybe next year. Not this year. It's different this year. All right, that's all I got on my agenda here. Let's dive into some questions.
Let's kick it off with Michael Schock, who asks, rank 1 to 5 most likely to least likely to get extensions, 1 being the one that is most likely to get an extension.
All right, so I'll start with 5. We'll go backwards. 5 is is Najee Harris. Najee Harris is number 5. Least likely to get an extension. Easy. 4, James Daniels. 3, Cam Hayward. 2, Justin Fields, and 1, Pat Freiermuth. I think Pat Freiermuth is the easiest answer. I get it that he's got a bunch of unlived up to expectations so far, but I think those could come. He wasn't healthy last season. He's going to be super cheap. I think Pat's an easy one. I think Justin Fields gets a deal done because they understand that's their best option moving forward. Cam Hayward, I'm feeling less optimistic about by the day. The rest of them, Najee and James Daniels, seem to be out. Even if I disagree with James Daniels, I just don't see them. I don't see them hanging on to him. I don't know why, but they're going to try to save money, and that's their answer. So I'd go Najee, Daniels, Hayward, Fields, Pat.
Alrighty. Well, going off of that, Jeremy Quintana wants to know, do you think Pat Freiermuth can be the Steelers' number 2 receiver? I think he's incredibly underrated, and he's going to be hungry for another contract. KC does it. Baltimore does it. Why can't the Steelers?
No, the Steelers can, and I think that they will try to. I think Pat Freiermuth will be used in a lot of ways. He will become more of a Travis Kelce tight end than a Pittsburgh Steelers tight end, and that's what they should try to do with him. I could see him being the team's number 2 wide receiver. I would like them to have a more reliable, versatile option, unless Arthur Smith's going to drop one super tight end friendly offense, which could be the case, but we're yet to see that. We're yet to see really anything. So that's a wait and see type of situation. I could see it. We've talked before about where the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver 2 can come from, and we've named Pat Freiermuth. I think that's an option, and I think it's a likely option if they don't make a move.
David wants to know, bias aside, Pickens is too good to not hold on to. Numbers don't show, but look who was throwing to him. What's the best option for wide receiver 2 if Brandon Ayuk doesn't work out for you?
Yeah, so George Pickens, I agree. You hold on to him. I think that you could get, I think even if he doesn't have the best year, you sign him for whatever the lowest amount of money you could sign him for and say, this is a really good wide receiver. You're not going to get better than George Pickens unless you're really looking. What's the best option for wide receiver 2 if Brandon Ayuk doesn't work out? First off, I think Brandon Ayuk would be the wide receiver 1 in Pittsburgh. Cortland Sutton is my easy answer, but he's not apparently on the table, which makes no sense to me. I think maybe later in the offseason, later in the summer, he could be on the table, but for right now, he's not. There's been a couple of names. John Mechie, Treylon Burks is out there. Robert Woods might be out there if you're just going to go with like old and reliable. Somebody tossed out Terrace Marshall yesterday. I kind of liked that one. There's a lot of names. I think there's a pretty significant fall off after Brandon Ayuk. So I think that's a list that is going to keep developing. And to be honest, when it comes to the list after Brandon Ayuk, it's a wait and see thing because we're not going to know until middle of training camp when teams start to realize who they don't want on their roster anymore.
The next question we're going to go with is going to be based off of that one. Adam wants to know, do you prefer upside in a wide receiver like Burks or John Mechie, or more of a proven guy like Lockett or a guy that you just mentioned and Robert Woods? Don't know if there are any other options, but would you prefer an upside or a veteran to answer that role?
Look, if you could get Tyler Lockett for whatever he's 1 year and you could afford him, which I don't think they could. I think he's making like $30 million or some crazy number like that. If you could figure that out, that is your best option. Like, go get it for 1 year, see what Roman Wilson does, see if he could develop, draft a guy next year or add a guy in free agency next year and make that work. I think a 1 year rental and a veteran is the best way to go about it. I don't think Robert Woods raises your ceiling a whole ton. Tyler Lockett clearly does. I think Treylon Burks is a giant question mark. John Mechie is less of a question mark. And I like John Mechie. I think he's got a ton of upside. But I don't know if they make you Super Bowl or bust the way that a guy like Tyler Lockett or Brandon Ayuk or any of those guys would.
Carl Spackler has a question here saying, do you think it's possible that Brandon Ayuk is more of a product of his system and what's around him versus his pure talent?
No, go watch Brandon Ayuk highlights at Arizona State, which was the worst run football team in college football when Brandon Ayuk was there. He was an absolute animal. The dude's a JUCO product who transferred to Arizona State, became a first-round wide receiver, and then a second-team All-Pro. Like, he's proven. This dude's nuts. It's not a system. There's no. I get it. Kyle Shanahan's system certainly helps. He's talent. He's a lot of talent. I'm go watch his clips at Arizona State. That's all I gotta say.
Cameron wants to know, is DK Metcalf still an option on the table?
DK Metcalf was never an option on the table and remains not an option on the table. He is not an option for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pretty plain and simple, to be honest.
Aaron wants to know, has Dan Moore looked any better during this offseason than he did last offseason?
Yeah, he's looked better than Troy Fautanu. I could say that. You know, Troy Fautanu looks like a rookie who needs a little bit of development, but you got to put pads on before you get offensive linemen and are able to judge these guys. So we'll see in training camp, but Dan Moore, look, somebody described this, and I've used this reference a million times on this show, is at some point somebody described Dan Moore to me, a scout described Dan Moore to me as your fifth best offensive lineman, which is not great for a left tackle, but somebody at some point's got to be your fifth best offensive lineman. If that's Dan Moore, it's not terrible, but Troy Fautanu has obviously got to be the better option. He just hasn't been yet. In comparison, Dan Moore's looked better.
Richard Hunt wants to know, how much money do the Steelers have left against the salary cap? If no receiver, who do you think would likely get restructured?
So the Steelers have just over $15 million in salary cap space remaining. You could restructure TJ Watts and Minkah Fitzpatrick's deal. And then if you extend Cam Hayward, which is not a guarantee, but if you extend Cam Hayward, you could also lower his cap hit by turning some of that into a signing bonus. Again, I don't know if that's going to happen, but you could do that. I think you could easily create $22 million if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, potentially more, depending on how you go. Ayuk's contract's 14.7 or something. So that's payable. And with restructures, you could still walk into the season with money to spend. So I would say those are your options. It's easy to come up with money if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Lifted Ones wants to know, when does training camp start up?
July 24th is when they arrive. July 25th is the first day of practice. We'll get you covered. I'll be out there sweating my butt off every day at good old Latrobe. Remember that practices are different this year. So they are in the morning. So it is, I think, 8 to like 10:30 or something like that. So, which is great for you guys and honestly great for me. Like everybody's like, oh man, dude, I want to be there late and go to Sharky's. To be honest with you, I want to go sleep in my bed a lot of times. And Sharky's is a blast. I love making my way to Sharky's. If you guys are at Sharky's and at training camp or at training camp as a whole, scream at me. If you want to talk to me, let me know you're there. I would love to come say hi to everybody. Last year was awesome getting to interact with as many as you guys as I could. But it will be earlier coverage, which is good. And we will have updates on this show. Just a heads up. We're going to have to change when we go live during training camp because we'll obviously be at practice at 9 a.m., but we'll figure that out and we'll keep you guys posted. We will still be going live Monday to Friday.
Rossi wants to know, do you think Omar Khan is just waiting out the San Francisco 49ers with Brandon Ayuk, or do you think it's Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys for DK Lamb?
No, it's not the Dallas Cowboys. I don't think CeeDee Lamb is an option for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't think DK Metcalf is an option for the Steelers. The 49ers are making things very difficult. I don't see it working out, but you never know. Ayuk's still on the table. How long he's going to be on the table, I don't know. It's getting a bit annoying how long we have to draw this out, but the 49ers are doing everything they can to avoid the inevitable. The inevitable will happen eventually.
Sean wants to know, what about a guy like Alec
Huh.
Pierce? Should we target him? I want him and think he would be a perfect counterpart to go with George Pickens.
I like Alec Pierce, excuse me. That's a good one. That's a name that hasn't been tossed out there a lot. I'm a big fan of that one. I don't know if he's necessarily wide receiver 2 solidified, but I do think he's a better option than a lot of guys that they have currently. I think he's an upgrade over Van Jefferson, who's supposed to be their wide receiver 2 now. I think he's reliable and still has some upside, which I like. I think he's got a lot of upside actually, which is a good move. I like the Alec Pierce move. That's an interesting one. That's a good one, Sean. I appreciate that. That might get added to the list there.
Brock wants to know, will the Steelers, plain and simple, win their first playoff game and end their playoff win drought this season?
Look at we're not the Miami Dolphins here. Okay. We waited out. We don't talk playoffs in July. That being said, potentially. I have no idea. That depends on if you find yourself in Kansas City in the opening round. It depends on if you find yourself in Baltimore or at home against Baltimore, or you're playing the Cleveland Browns. There's a million different directions that the playoffs can go. For right now, it's a wait and see type of thing.
Steelman wants to know, I don't know if you guys play video games at all or not, but if you do, are you more excited for Madden 25 or the return of EA College Football 25?
Yeah, so my brothers, like I was saying, they showed up last night. We're going to the concert tonight. We were talking and just hanging out. My one brother that's what he does. He's a YouTube streamer. He's our Twitch streamer. He's a YouTube guy. He's a content creator. And he plays video games, but he's not into sports games. And I was like, dude, you want to stream with me? We could stream the day that college football drops. I was like, because I won't be existent for 3 days, maybe 4 days. You're not going to catch me all weekend long. I've already informed the wife. It's not happening. She knows about it. She's well aware of when we're going to be moving at the time as well. So the first thing that's going in the new house is a television and the PC, so that we could, I could just sit there and not move, and we could put everything on hold. Easily college football. Very excited. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I'm thinking about streaming at least a season on YouTube. So we'll see what happens. I'll keep you updated.
Aaron Ball has a question here saying, if Nick Herbig breaks out, what do you do with a guy like Alex Highsmith?
I mean, you keep him on the roster this season, and then next year you probably trade him, which I think it's equally as likely that Alex Highsmith has a massive season as Nick Herbig, or both of them have massive seasons. I think the Steelers could find themselves in a place where they have 3 outside linebackers who are crazy good, which is a good thing to be in. And Nick Herbig is only entering his second year, so you have time. You could sit with 3 dominant outside linebackers, which would be ideal for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and then have another year of all 3 of them, and then move on from Alex Highsmith. That could be ideal for the Steelers, and it would depend on the salary cap situation next year, where they have to come up with money, how much money they have to come up with. But Herbig's not a contract that you have to worry about for the next 3 years. So you have time to have 3 really good outside linebackers and just keep them together as long as you could.
Lifted Ones has another training camp question here saying, what's it like living in Pittsburgh, and what's Sharky's?
Sharky's is just like the bar in Latrobe. It's the bar in Latrobe. I don't know if there's another bar out there, but that's the only one that we go to. If you want to find Steelers writers, some Steelers coaches, a lot of the time, anybody, Steelers fans, Sharky's is bumping all training camp. It's a good time. The owners are incredible. The food is phenomenal. There's games. You could do a little. I think there's like, at one point it was like a soccer simulator. I think it might be a golf simulator now. Pizza's good. The wings are phenomenal. The beer is good. It's a good time. Sharky's is awesome. Definitely, if you're in Latrobe for training camp, hit up Sharky's. It's worth it.
Luke
and living in Pittsburgh is great. It's a little cold in the winter. It's definitely windy, but I would never. We were in Italy, and all I kept saying was, "Man, dude, I just miss Pittsburgh a little bit." So I love living there.
You're catching a lot of heat for that. Your Italy takes yesterday, but
Dude,
man,
I don't care. Look, I'm a very simple guy. Okay, you give me my garden, my backyard, my podcast, and that's all I need. And my city of Pittsburgh. That's all I
see,
need.
I'll take the Amalfi Coast any day. But that's where we differ. That's where we differ. Luke Nessie wants to know: should we try to get a Justin Simmons instead of getting a wide receiver, shoring up the secondary even more than it already is?
I think at one point the Justin Simmons thing made a lot of sense and would have been an awesome move. I think at this point the ship has sailed because I like Deshaun Elliott. I think the Cam Sutton move ended any talk of Justin Simmons. Justin Simmons is phenomenal. Why he is not signed, crazy, makes no sense to me. I don't think the Steelers are an option for him at this point. I don't think you'd want to come here. There's Deshaun's the guy. He's young. He's going to be the guy next to Minka for a couple of years. Justin would kind of be the third guy. And I don't think an all-pro is looking for that. He's going to sign somewhere. He's old enough where he doesn't even have to go to training camp, and he can come in here and make a massive impact anywhere. So he's going to sign elsewhere. I don't think he's an option for the Steelers.
Sean says, is this the year that we consider TJ Watt at the end of the line? I want him to win a ring, but I also don't want to waste his prime years like the Texans did with his brother JJ.
No, TJ Watt is a Pittsburgh Steeler until the day he doesn't want to be a Pittsburgh Steeler anymore. That guy bleeds black and gold. He loves football. He's a leader. Nobody works harder than TJ Watt. And the Steelers are hunting for a Super Bowl. This team is not I get the Texans. They definitely wasted JJ Watt, especially at the end there. But the Steelers aren't that same team. They're a team hunting for a chip. And TJ wants to be a part of that. TJ's not going anywhere.
Jack the Goat says, how's the O-line looking? You already mentioned that it's kind of hard to tell without full pads, but how did they look throughout helmets and shorts?
A lot of guys look good. Broderick Jones looked good. Zach Frazier looked good. Nate Herbig looked good. The guards look good. It looks smooth. Troy Fautano was the only guy who stood out where you went, okay, he's a rookie. He's a rookie, and he's got to put some pads on, and we got to see how the athleticism goes. Things calm down a little bit. But besides that, everybody looked good. We'll know a lot more in training camp, the second week of training camp when the pads come on. But for right now, the expectations are high for the Steelers offensive line, even if Dan Moore is a starter.
That's a wrap for today's questions.
Beautiful. With that said, I got to address this one. Carl, I'll hit you up. I'll hit you up. No doubt about it. All right. With that said, we're going to head out of here. Thank you guys so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts, and please go find all of our work at si.com/NFL/Steelers. We love these live streams, and we will be back tomorrow with another. Enjoy another beautiful day in the Berg. Peace.